Hello everyone, this is Ifeyinwa. Welcome to Finding Africa, to explore and share the beauty of Africa, starting with folk stories from southern Nigeria. How the Cannibals drove the people from Insofan mountain to the Cross River, Ikom. Very many years ago, before the oldest man alive at the present time can remember, the towns of Ikom, Okuni, Abidjan, Insofan, Obokum, and all the other injure towns were situated round and near the Insofan mountain, and the head chief of the whole country was called Agbo. Abragba and Enfito also lived there, and were also under King Agbo. The Insofan mountain is about 2 days' march inland from the Cross River, and as none of the people there could swim and knew nothing about canoes, they never went anywhere outside their own country and were afraid to go down to the big river. The whole country was taken up with yam farms and was divided amongst the various towns, each town having its own bush. At the end of each year, when it was time to dig the yams, there was a big play held, which was called the New Yam Feast. At this festival, there was always a big human sacrifice, 50 slaves being killed in one day. These slaves were tied up to trees in a row, and many drums were beaten. Then a strong man armed with a sharp machete went from one slave to another and cut their heads off. This was done to cool the new yams, so that they would not hurt the stomachs of the people. Until this sacrifice was made, no one in the country would eat a new yam, as they knew if they did so, they would suffer great pain in their insides. When the feast was held, all the towns brought 100 yams each as a present to King Agbo. When the slaves were all killed, fires were lit, and the dead bodies were placed over the fires to burn the hair off. A number of plantain leaves were then gathered and placed on the ground, and the bodies, having been cut into pieces, were placed on the plantain leaves. When the yams were skinned, they were put into large pots with water, oil, pepper, and salt. The cut-up bodies were then put in on top, and the pots covered up with other clay pots and left to boil for an hour. The king, having called all the people together, then declared the new yam feast had commenced, and singing and dancing were kept up for 3 days and nights, during which time much palm wine was consumed, and all the bodies and yams which had been provided for them were eaten by the people. The heads were given to the king for his share, and when he had finished eating them, the skulls were placed before the juju with some new yams, so that there should be a good crop the following season. But although these natives ate the dead bodies of the slaves at the New Yam Feast, they did not eat human flesh during the rest of the year. This went on for many years, until at last the Okuni people noticed that the graves of the people who had been buried were frequently dug open and the bodies removed. This caused great wonder, and as they did not like the idea of their dead relations being taken away, they made a complaint to King Agbo. He at once caused a watch to be set on all newly dug graves, and that very night they caught 7 men, who were very greedy and used to come whenever a body was buried, dig it up, and carry it into the bush, where they made a fire and cooked it and ate it. When they were caught, the people made them show where they lived and where they cooked the bodies. After walking for some hours in the forest, they came to a place where large heaps of human bones and skulls were found. The 7 men were then securely fastened up and brought before King Agbo, who held a large palaver of all the towns, and the whole situation was discussed. Agbo said that this bad custom would necessitate all the towns separating, as they could not allow their dead relations to be dug up and eaten by these greedy people, and he could see no other way to prevent it. Agbo then gave one of the men to each of the 7 towns and told some of them to go onto the far side of the big river and make their towns there. The others were to go farther down the river on the same side as Insofan mountain. And when they found suitable places, they were each to kill their man as a sacrifice and then build their town. All the towns then departed, and when they had found good sites, they built their towns there. When they had all gone, after a time, Agbo began to feel very lonely. So he left the site of his old town and also went to the Cross River to live, so that he could see his friends. After that, the New Yam Feast was held in each town, and the people still continued to kill and eat a few slaves at the feast. But the bodies of their relations and friends were kept for a long time above ground until they had become rotten, so that the greedy people should not dig them up and eat them. This is why, even at the present time, the people do not like to bury their dead relations until they have become putrid. Moral: do not eat your neighbors. There is fresh meat and vegetables at the markets. The Lucky Fisherman. In the olden days, there were no hooks or casting nets, so that when the natives wanted to catch fish, they made baskets and set traps at the riverside. One man named Ikom, who was very poor, began to make baskets and traps out of bamboo palm. And then when the river went down, he used to take his traps to a pool and set them baited with palm nuts. In the night, the big fish used to smell the palm nuts and go into the trap, when at once the door would fall down, and in the morning, Ikom would go and take the fish out. He was very successful in his fishing and used to sell the fish in the market for plenty of money. When he could afford to pay the dowry, he married a woman named Eyong, a native of Okuni, and had 3 children by her. But he still continued his fishing. The eldest son was called Ode, the second Yambi, and the third Atuk. These 3 boys, when they grew up, helped their father with his fishing, and he gradually became wealthy and bought plenty of slaves. At last, he joined the Egbo society and became one of the chiefs of the town. Even after he became a chief, he and his sons still continued to fish. One day, when he was crossing the river in a small dug-out canoe, a tornado came on very suddenly, and the canoe capsized, drowning the chief. When his sons heard of the death of their father, they wanted to go and drown themselves also, but they were persuaded not to by the people. After searching for 2 days, they found the dead body some distance down the river and brought it back to the town. They then called their company together to play, dance, and sing for 12 days in accordance with their native custom, and much palm wine was drunk. When the play was finished, they took their father's body to a hollowed-out cavern and placed 2 live slaves with it, one holding a native lamp of palm oil and the other holding a machete. They were both tied up so that they could not escape and were left there to keep watch over the dead chief until they died of starvation. When the cave was covered in, the sons called the chiefs together and they played Egbo for 7 days, which used up a lot of their late father's money. When the play was over, the chiefs were surprised at the amount of money which the sons had been able to spend on the funeral of their father, as they know how poor he had been as a young man. They therefore called him the Lucky Fisherman. Moral: You can build your strength small by small. You just have to start with what you already have. The Orphan Boy and the Magic Stone. A chief of Inde named Nkita had a son named Ayong Kita, whose mother had died at his birth. The old chief was a hunter and used to take his son out with him when he went into the bush. He used to do most of his hunting in the long grass, which grows over nearly all the Inde country, and used to kill plenty of bush buck in the dry season. In those days, the people had no guns, so the chief had to shoot everything he got with his bow and arrows, which required a lot of skill. When his little son was old enough, he gave him a small bow and some small arrows and taught him how to shoot. The little boy was very quick at learning, and by continually practicing at lizards and small birds, soon became expert in the use of his little bow, and could hit them almost every time he shot at them. When the boy was 10 years old, his father died, and as he thus became the head of his father's house and was in authority over all the slaves, they became very discontented and made plans to kill him, so he ran away into the bush. Having nothing to eat, he lived for several days on the nuts which fell from the palm trees. He was too young to kill any large animals, and only had his small bow and arrows, with which he killed a few squirrels, bush rats, and small birds, and so managed to live. Now, once at night, when he was sleeping in the hollow of a tree, he had a dream in which his father appeared and told him where there was plenty of treasure buried in the earth. But being a small boy, he was frightened and did not go to the place. One day, sometime after the dream, having walked far and being very thirsty, he went to a lake and was just going to drink when he heard a hissing sound and heard a voice tell him not to drink. Not seeing anyone, he was afraid and ran away without drinking. Early next morning, when he was out with his bow trying to shoot some small animal, he met an old woman with quite long hair. She was so ugly that he thought she must be a witch, so he tried to run. But she told him not to fear, as she wanted to help him and assist him to rule over his late father's house. She also told him that it was she who had called out to him at the lake not to drink, as there was a bad juju in the water which would have killed him. The old woman then took Ayong to a stream some little distance from the lake, and bending down, took out a small shining stone from the water, which she gave to him, at the same time telling him to go to the place which his father had advised him to visit in his dream. She then said, "When you get there, you must dig, and you will find plenty of money. You must then go and buy 2 strong slaves, and when you have got them, you must take them into the forest, away from the town, and get them to build you a house with several rooms in it. You must then place the stone in one of the rooms, and whenever you want anything, all you have to do is go into the room and tell the stone what you want, and your wishes will be at once gratified." Ayong did as the old woman told him, and after much difficulty and danger, bought the 2 slaves and built a house in the forest, taking great care of the precious stone, which he placed in an inside room. Then for some time, whenever he wanted anything, he used to go into the room and ask for a sufficient number of rods to buy what he wanted, and they were always brought at once. This went on for many years, and Ayong grew up to be a man and became very rich and bought many slaves, having made friends with the Arrow men, who in those days used to do a big traffic in slaves. After 10 years had passed, Ayong had quite a large town and many slaves. But one night, the old woman appeared to him in a dream and told him that she thought that he was sufficiently wealthy and that it was time for him to return the magic stone to the small stream from whence it came. But Ayong, although he was rich, wanted to rule his father's house and be a head chief for all the Inde country. So he sent for all the juju men in the country and 2 witch men and marched with all his slaves to his father's town. Before he started, he held a big palaver and told them to point out any slave who had a bad heart and who might kill him when he came to rule the country. Then the juju men consulted together and pointed out 50 of the slaves who they said were witches and would try to kill Ayong. He at once had them made prisoners and tried them by the ordeal of Eserebin to see whether they were witches or not. As none of them could vomit the beans, they all died and were declared to be witches. He then had them buried at once. When the remainder of the slaves saw what had happened, they all came to him and begged his pardon and promised to serve him faithfully. Although the 50 men were buried, they could not rest and troubled Ayong very much, and after a time he became very sick himself. So he sent again for the juju men, who told him that it was the witch men who, although they were dead and buried, had power to come out at night and used to suck Ayong's blood, which was the cause of his sickness. Then they said, "We are only 3 juju men. You must get 7 more of us," making the magic number of 10. When they came, they dug up the bodies of the 50 witches and found they were quite fresh. Then Ayong had big fires made and burned them one after the other and gave the juju men a big present. He soon after became quite well again and took possession of his father's property and ruled over all the country. Ever since then, whenever anyone is accused of being a witch, they are tried by the ordeal of the poisonous Eserebin, and if they can vomit, they do not die and are declared innocent. But if they cannot do so, they die in great pain. Moral: if you want to live in peace, destroy your enemies. The slave girl who tried to kill her mistress. A man called Ikom, who was a native of Oku, a town in the Ibibio country, admired a girl called Emmy very much who lived at Ibibio and wished to marry her, as she was the finest girl in her company. It was the custom in those days for the parents to demand such a large amount for their daughters as dowry, that if after they were married they failed to get on with their husbands, as they could not redeem themselves, they were sold as slaves. Ikom paid a very large sum as dowry for Emmy, and she was put in the fatting house until the proper time arrived for her to marry. Ikom told the parents that when their daughter was ready, they must send her over to him. This they promised to do. Emmy's father was a rich man, and after 7 years had elapsed and it became time for her to go to her husband, he saw a very fine girl who had also just come out of the fatting house and whom the parents wished to sell as a slave. Emmy's father therefore bought her and gave her to his daughter as her handmaiden. The next day, Emmy's little sister, being very anxious to go with her, obtained the consent of her mother, and they started off together, the slave girl carrying a large bundle containing clothes and presents from Emmy's father. Ikom's house was a long day's march from where they lived. When they arrived just outside the town, they came to a spring where the people used to get their drinking water from, but no one was allowed to bathe there. Emmy, however, knew nothing about this. They took off their clothes to wash close to the spring, and where there was a deep hole which led to the water juju's house. The slave girl knew of this juju and thought if she could get her mistress to bathe, she would be taken by the juju, and she would then be able to take her place and marry Akpan. So they went down to bathe, and when they were close to the water, the slave girl pushed her mistress in, and she at once disappeared. The little girl then began to cry, but the slave girl said, "If you cry any more, I will kill you at once and throw your body into the hole after your sister." And she told the girl that she must never mention what had happened to anyone, and particularly not to Akpan, as she was going to represent her sister and marry him, and that if she ever told anyone what she had seen, she would be killed at once. She then made the little girl carry her load to Akpan's house. When they arrived, Akpan was very much disappointed at the slave girl's appearance, as she was not nearly as pretty and fine as he had expected her to be. But as he had not seen Emmy for 7 years, he had no suspicion that the girl was not really Emmy, for whom he had paid such a large dowry. He then called all his company together to play and feast, and when they arrived, they were very much astonished and said, "Is this the fine woman for whom you paid so much dowry, and whom you told us so much about?" And Akpan could not answer them. The slave girl was then for some time very cruel to Emmy's little sister and wanted her to die, so that her position would be more secure with her husband. She beat the little girl every day and always made her carry the largest water pot to the spring. She also made the child place her finger in the fire to use as firewood. When the time came for food, the slave girl went to the fire and got a burning piece of wood and burned the child all over the body with it. When Akbar asked her why she treated the girl so badly, she replied that she was a slave that her father had bought for her. When the little girl took the heavy pot to the river to fill it, there was no one to lift it up for her, so that she could not get it on her head. She therefore had to remain a long time at the spring, and at last began calling for her sister Emmy to come and help her. When Emmy heard her little sister crying for help, she begged the water juju to allow her to go and help her. So he told her she might go, but that she must return to him again immediately. When the little girl saw her sister, she did not want to leave her, and asked to be allowed to go into the hole with her. She then told Emmy how very badly she had been treated by the slave girl, and her elder sister told her to have patience and wait, that a day of vengeance would arrive sooner or later. The little girl went back to Akpan's house with a glad heart, as she had seen her sister. But when she got to the house, the slave girl said, "Why have you been so long getting the water?" And then took another stick from the fire and burned the little girl again very badly, and starved her for the rest of the day. This went on for some time, until one day, when the child went to the river for water. After all the people had gone, she cried for her sister as usual. But she did not come for a long time, as there was a hunter from Akpan's town hidden near, watching the hole, and the water juju told Emmy that she must not go. But as the little girl went on crying bitterly, Emmy at last persuaded the juju to let her go, promising to return quickly. When she emerged from the water, she looked very beautiful with the rays of the setting sun shining on her glistening body. She helped her little sister with her water pot and then disappeared into the hole again. The hunter was amazed at what he had seen, and when he returned, he told Akpan what a beautiful woman had come out of the water and had helped the little girl with her water pot. He also told Akpan that he was convinced that the little girl he had seen at the spring was his proper wife, Emmy, and that the water juju must have taken her. Akpan then made up his mind to go out and watch and see what happened. So in the early morning, the hunter came for him, and they both went down to the river and hid in the forest near the water hole. When Akpan saw Emmy come out of the water, he recognized her at once and went home and considered how he should get her out of the power of the water juju. He was advised by some of his friends to go to an old woman who frequently made sacrifices to the water juju and consult her as to what was the best thing to do. When he went to her, she told him to bring her 1 white slave, 1 white goat, 1 piece of white cloth, 1 white chicken, and a basket of eggs. Then, when the great juju day arrived, she would take them to the water juju and make a sacrifice of them on his behalf. The day after the sacrifice was made, the water juju would return the girl to her, and she would bring her to Akpan. Akpan then bought the slave and took all the other things to the old woman. And when the day of the sacrifice arrived, he went with his friend the hunter and witnessed the old woman make the sacrifice. The slave was bound up and led to the hole. Then the old woman called to the water juju and cut the slave's throat with a sharp knife and pushed him into the hole. She then did the same to the goat and chicken, and also threw the eggs and cloth in on top of them. After this had been done, they all returned to their homes. The next morning at dawn, the old woman went to the hole and found Emmy standing at the side of the spring. So she told her that she was her friend and was going to take her to her husband. She then took Emmy back to her own home and hid her in her room and sent word to Akpan to come to her house and to take great care that the slave woman knew nothing about the matter. So Akpan left the house secretly by the back door and arrived at the old woman's house without meeting anybody. When Emmy saw Akpan, she asked for her little sister, so he sent his friend the hunter for her to the spring, and he met her carrying her water pot to get the morning supply of water for the house, and brought her to the old woman's house with him. When Emmy had embraced her sister, she told her to return to the house and do something to annoy the slave woman, and then she was to run as fast as she could back to the old woman's house, where no doubt the slave girl would follow her and would meet them all inside the house and see Emmy, who she believed she had killed. The little girl did as she was told, and directly she got into the house, she called out to the slave woman, "Do you know that you are a wicked woman and have treated me very badly? I know you are only my sister's slave and you will be properly punished." She then ran as hard as she could to the old woman's house. Directly the slave woman heard what the little girl said, she was quite mad with rage and seized a burning stick from the fire and ran after the child, but the little one got to the house first and ran inside, the slave woman following close upon her heels with the burning stick in her hand. Then Emmy came out and confronted the slave woman, and she at once recognized her mistress, whom she thought she had killed, so she stood quite still. Then they all went back to Akpan's house, and when they arrived there, Akpan asked the slave woman what she meant by pretending that she was Emmy, and why she had tried to kill her. But seeing she was found out, the slave woman had nothing to say. Many people were then called to a play to celebrate the recovery of Akpan's wife, and when they had all come, he told them what the slave woman had done. After this, Emmy treated the slave girl in the same way as she had treated her little sister. She made her put her fingers in the fire and burnt her with sticks. She also made her beat fufu with her head in a hollowed out tree, and after a time, she was tied up to a tree and starved to death. Ever since that time, when a man marries a girl, he is always present when she comes out of the fatting house and takes her home himself. so that such evil things as happened to Emmy and her sister may not occur again. Moral: when you are in a position of power, be kind to those who depend on you, as one day they could have power over you. The King and the Insat Bird. When Indarake was king of Idu, being young and rich, he was very fond of fine girls and had plenty of slaves. The Insat bird was then living at Idu and had a very pretty daughter whom Indarake wished to marry. When he spoke to the father about the matter, he replied that of course he had no objection personally, as it would be a great honor for his daughter to marry the king. But unfortunately, when any of his family had children, they always gave birth to twins, which, as the king knew, was not allowed in the country. The native custom being to kill both the children and throw them into the bush, the mother being driven away and allowed to starve. The king, however, being greatly struck with Adet, the bird's daughter, insisted on marrying her, so the Insat bird had to agree. A large amount of dowry was paid by the king, and a big play and feast was held. One strong slave was told to carry Adet Insat during the whole play, and she sat on his shoulders with her legs around his neck. This was done to show what a rich and powerful king the man was. After the marriage, in due course, Adet gave birth to twins, as her mother had done before her. The king immediately became very fond of the two babies, but according to the native custom, which was too strong for anyone to resist, he had to give them up to be killed. When the Insat bird heard this, he went to the king and reminded him that he had warned the king before he married what would happen if he married Adet. And rather that the twins should be killed, he and the whole of his family would leave the earth and dwell in the air, taking the twins with them. As the king was so fond of Adet and the two children, and did not want them to be killed, he gladly consented, and the Insat bird took the whole of his family, as well as Adet and her two children away, and left the earth to live and make their home in the trees. But as they had formerly lived in the town with all the people, they did not like to go into the forest, so they made their nests in the trees which grew in the town. And that is why you always see the Insat birds living and making their nests only in places where human beings are. The black birds are the cocks, and the golden-colored ones are the hens. It was the beautiful color of Adet which first attracted the attention of Indarake and caused him to marry her. Moral: if you do not cherish what you love up close, you will have to love it from a distance. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, hit the subscribe button. If you didn't enjoy the story, still hit the subscribe button because you may like the next one. Until next time, enjoy life. Finding Africa.